Hey, sister.
Hey, sister.
Okay, welcome, listeners, to this episode of the Sunflower Society podcast. I think we're on episode 43.
44, I think. Oh, no. 43.
So listeners, we recorded like a 2-hour episode, which was very therapeutic and healing for us. However, we let go of any attachment we had to it because there was zero audio. We were using a different device than normal, and long story short, this is episode 43. So I guess let's dive right in. Do you want to kick off fave or fail?
Yeah.
So listeners, if this is your first time tuning in, welcome. We are all about this is our conversations of personal growth and development. A lot of our content is spiritual in nature, and also very vulnerable. We also like to cut up and have fun, but we're two sisters. We have different takes and different perspectives on a lot. So it usually offers some good banter. But we have a segment that we kick off every episode with called Fave and Fail. So something we either tried and really liked, maybe something that didn't work out so well. So if you go first, I should have mine ready then. I didn't prepare anything.
My fave for the week is our web mini-series that we're going to be releasing soon. Are we allowed to say the name, or should we wait on all of that? We're very excited about it.
If you feel led, sure.
I mean, what do your HR people say? What are your HR PR people telling you?
Well, my people told your people, which is really just me telling you. Let's wait.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's wait on the name.
We're working on a 7-part mini-series, and it's going to knock your socks off. And we'll just leave it at that. You're going to be able to binge watch all 7 episodes within a reasonable amount of time.
Yep.
Yeah, we're super excited about it.
It's like a docu-series on Netflix on steroids, because you'll be able to watch the entire series in about an hour.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's
my fave. That's my fave too. So
hey, wait a minute. No, you won't be able to watch it in an hour, because I suspect here's the deal. So all of the episodes are around 10 minutes, but unfortunately, due to our technology, some of our technology battles, they've cut us off. But we've kept the video on our segments because it was just like the perfect thing we had to say. So our final episode of the series is going to be us wrapping up all the lingering conversations. So that, I think it'll probably take close to a couple hours to devour the whole thing, but it doesn't really matter. You're going to love it. It's great. Okay. Fail.
Faves.
Ooh, what's my fail? I know what my fail is. So I found this is a fave, but also a fail. I found a new podcast that I really enjoy. For those of you who don't follow me on social media at all, I have been sharing quite a bit about deconstructing my faith and what that means. But I listened to this podcast called Dirty Rotten Church Kids, 2 ex-pastors who I absolutely love. But it's not really for people who are not into exploring their faith at this point. They use language like swearing and stuff like that. So if that's not something that you like, then I would not recommend checking them out, but would recommend for those of you who are interested in kind of finding your authentic faith and all of that. That being said, they brought up this blog of a man that does work with how to groom your young Christian wife and other similar topics. So that was really, I went right to the page. I read what he had to say. I made a social media post about it. But then I went back in and scrolled and to see, because he's got a whole freaking library in that blog, and he's had 9 million, close to 10 million hits since the inception of his blog. So that means this is not like an isolated, I had a friend of mine that commented, well, this seems really like out there kind of thing. Is this really that?
Oh, not many people must be following this.
Right. There are definitely elements. The post that I shared is an element that I'm like, yeah, this isn't really like talked about at all. Like I've never heard this issue talked about in the church, in the way that he was talking about it. But the underpinnings of all of his work is to basically try and manipulate the word of God to say something about women that it doesn't, in my opinion. But the disturbing fail was the fact that he has like close to 10 million hits to his blog, and he says some very familiar things, let's just put it that way, that were a deep rooted part of my personal upbringing and theology that were very harmful. So that's my fail.
Yeah, I would concur. I'm loving their podcast, but I too listened to that episode, and my current fail right now is like I'm failing forward and trying to figure it out thing. And if you followed me for a while, you know that I'm always open to trying whatever to achieve my best body. So my fail right now is I felt very, very on point with my fitness, and I still do to an extent. There's been a lot of things I've worked on in my own health journey when it comes to overeating, stress eating, just my relationship with food, really. So my one area that I still find problematic, and I have not had children, is my stomach. I'm sure some listeners will relate to that. So whether you've had kids or not, for many women, especially after you hit 30, that's going to be your more problematic area. So for me, I am just continuing, like, it's really not a fail. It's just me being vulnerable and sharing openly so that hopefully listeners don't feel defeated. Like, I often go in cycles, and I'll feel really great, and I'll be like, wait, yeah, my waist is shrinking. I've fit into jeans from 8 years ago, which is true. I'm back to that healthy size and weight. But I also, like, I think it's one of those things, because I'm going out on a limb to say this, because some people might really strongly disagree with me, especially with the body positivity movements, etc. For me, yes, I can be confident at any size I've been at, but it's also tough when you know what your body is physically capable of.
Right.
So it's one thing if I've always been 500 pounds and that's what I'm used to working with, and I'm really, really healthy, that's one thing. But I also know what it's like to be able to run out my door and run 5 miles. And I can't do that right now. So I think I'm at that turning point where it's like, okay, cool. I've gotten some results. I feel really great about the way I look, but quite honestly, my stomach still looks like I could be a month pregnant. And I'm not a month pregnant, and I've never had kids.
I'm not saying right, like, yes, you look like, that way to
right, me. Right, you got a major muffin top.
No, you look great. I saw you last weekend and you look amazing. So I was talking to somebody recently about this same thing, and they're really struggling with like even going out of their house to get exercise because they're so self-conscious about the way that they look. And so my encouragement to her was just to like, you know, we've all been there before, and some times of the month with water retention and all of the hormones and things that happen, you can fluctuate quite a bit and feel just different in your body. It doesn't mean that you've changed anything about what you're doing or putting in your body, but you can just feel a sense of heaviness and like being rooted to the ground and not light on your feet. And I said, if you can just focus on trying to make yourself feel like light on your feet and not even worry about a size, not worry about a weight, just worry about the way you feel in your body, being able to stretch. Like when I first started doing yoga, to be honest with you, I couldn't even, like, I used to be a dancer and I used to
Yeah.
be able to do some crazy flexible things with my body. And when I started taking that kind of exercise again, I couldn't bend over to touch my toes when I was sitting. Like, I do this routine that I have always done. And I was like, it's been so long since I've done this
Yeah.
routine and this warm up that I can't even, like, my stomach is in the way.
Yeah.
So I've worked to try, like, now it's not like, it's like your body knows how to move and shape itself as you do things that make it feel better.
Right.
So that's encouraging to me to think about that way. But also, I follow this girl on Instagram called the Birds Papaya, and she's been
Yeah,
like
I love her.
extremely rail thin, and then she's also been on, the more plus size of things. I don't know if that's the appropriate terminology these days, but
She's more like a size 12,
she
cellulite
posts
out, like
body
not
positivity.
holding back
Yeah.
her curves and her gained pounds over the years.
And honestly, I'm gonna say something. It might sound the wrong way. I don't care. I'm gonna say it anyhow. When I started following her, she posts a lot of pictures of her in swimsuits.
Yeah.
And I'm so used to seeing like these perfectly airbrushed photos of women all over, like we all are. I was obsessed with like Vogue magazine and Elle and all the fashion, like
That's
high
what we
fashion
all wanted
magazines.
to look at growing up.
Right. So
Well, you and I would check them out at the library because they were they cost too much and were a waste of money to try to ask.
And also, I don't think we were really allowed to be reading those, so I would sneak read them at the library.
Yeah.
But anyways, when I first started following her, like, she's a beautiful person and she has so many good things to say, but I was like somewhat thrown off by, like, she just posts open lumpy cellulite pictures of her butt, like her physical
or her
butt.
rolls
Right.
going over
But I
at
have
the
to
swimsuit.
say, the more that I look at that, that's very similar to how most of us look,
Yeah.
in certain ways. But the more I started like looking at her, I started seeing not only her body in a different way, but my own body in a different way, because she exudes so much confidence, and it's like, it's skin. It's like skin. And we tie this value to it, or this beauty quotient to it, that doesn't really make sense at all. And actually now, like, I'm like, you know what? I have this certain image of maybe going back, because I used to be very, very thin, but that also came at a cost of, I was never enjoying food. I was very anxious about
You
eating
looked
food.
borderline really sick.
I was sick. No, I was sick. I really, like, the way that I treated food and ate was not healthy. But it was also very shocking once I started enjoying food and enjoying cooking and all of that stuff, for me to see myself put on weight and be okay with it. Even though this is my body. This is like, I, at certain points, I guess I've struggled with overeating, but in the sense of, I'm going to finish the kids' food so that I don't waste it type of thing.
Right.
Not so much like, I'm going to eat my feelings type of thing. That's not really been, but I love cooking.
That's been a struggle for me. That was my, that became my coping mechanism. And I didn't even realize it, because I didn't used to like enjoy or not enjoy food. Like, I was fine with it, but I barely had time. Even growing up, we were going so much and in sports and stuff, like, it was just a means to like nourish your body.
It's more accessible now because food is more accessible.
Yeah.
Because for me, because I love to cook and it's always around in my home, but also just because we make our own meal. We choose what we buy at the grocery store. It's not our mom coming home and having only certain snacks for us to eat or certain times for us to eat. Like, it's up, that is really important thing that I try to teach my kids, like, eat until you're not hungry anymore. Don't eat necessarily until you're full, because if you don't learn that stuff as a kid, it's like when you're on your own, it's like, whoa, like
I've had to literally learn that. Like, retraining my body to actually stop when it's full.
Yeah.
Like that. It's a
Yeah.
process. So, I mean, like, I don't say that because I feel bad about myself where I'm at, but my fail is just that there are times when I know I've slid into old patterns with stress. Even if now it doesn't show up with eating, I hold on to weight a lot more if I have stress or anxiety built up.
Yeah.
So
Cortisol.
then that's when I pause. Like, I think when you identify something in your life, it doesn't just have to be weight, it doesn't have to be some type of addiction, it can be anything, but something you identify that you want to work on, and you know that you are deserving of your best body, how you feel, all those things, then you make the shifts and you consistently pivot to try different things. So
We
I
all
never
have,
get tired of trying different things because I know that I've had success to a point, but I like, for me, it's more about that balance factor of, okay, well, just because you get super busy or have a busy season, don't fall back into these old habits of, because I can overeat with super healthy food too.
oh
And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
more it and honestly, when it goes back to human physiology, in my opinion, the reason why I like the reasons why I have periods where I'll look super thinned out, those are periods where I'm not stressed and I don't have anxiety.
Yeah.
That's the deeper tie.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
for everybody that shows up differently, for some people it might be smoking cigarettes. I don't know. But
We all have our coping
yeah,
mechanisms, and just like with addiction, I mean, I view all of those things, the things that we put into our bodies and in our lives that are negative coping mechanisms. Like, our work is to try to replace those behaviors with positive things that make us feel fulfilled and make us feel the same way, because that really is what it is. We're trying to fill some kind of a void. But can we fill it with, say, um, instead of, I don't know, instead of going out and smoking a cigarette, could I go on a really long walk and power walk instead and listen to a podcast and have that same feeling
no,
or
no,
serotonin
not
boost?
at first, I'm sure. I mean, I don't smoke cigarettes, but I can imagine that at first, no.
No,
It'll be like,
right. But
no,
the
that's
goal is to
definitely not
get
the same.
the goal is to get to where we can replace some of
Right,
these behaviors. That
right.
was, for example, because that is a chemical dependency.
Yeah.
But we're also chemically dependent on serotonin boosts in a lot of
With
ways, and that's,
food, it's the same thing with
yeah.
food. And that leads to our conversation and our topic today. And because I personally have noticed over the years of having a history with different churches, different denominations, a lot of times you have certain sins that are treated like more egregious than others. Which I will say the Bible talks about 7 deadly sins. However, I've never heard a pastor preach on overeating.
Isn't that
But
greed though, or gluttony or
it's
whatever? I don't know what the
gluttony.
7 deadly sins
It's
are. This
gluttony. There's a lot of preaching on like addiction and money and those type of relationships, but I've never heard a pastor, and in fact I've seen a lot of overweight pastors. And so I guess I'm saying all this to say, like, what you brought up is wanting to talk about the topic of how, like, how we determine who we love, how much we love them, those type of things. I think what starts to happen is that's reflected based on what you believe about these different topics that are taught in your church that you're part of, or in your
we have
friend
a
circle.
hierarchy. We have a hierarchy of really bad stuff or really bad sin. And I personally, I view sin, I don't even really like to use that term anymore, because we all have things in our lives that we're works in progress on. And so for me, when you say something about 7 deadly sins, to me, they're deadly, not because God's going to come strike me down in condemnation,
Right.
but because we know this is God's like precursor to science or anything like that.
It was a warning.
He goes, hey, I made your bodies this way and I made you to interact this way. And so like, if you don't do these things, like stay away from certain things or put certain things in your body or put too much of certain things in your body,
right,
you will die sooner than later.
That's why they're deadly.
Yeah.
But
so
I define sin as anything that keeps you from growing closer to God.
Yeah, absolutely. Same. Yeah. But it's not necessarily tied to a moral choice. Like there's this constant thing that goes on in the church of living in sin, or the reason that you're not seeing blessings or abundance in your life is because of sin, because you have some kind of hidden sin that you're just not telling yourself about. And while that can look a certain, like that can be sort of true, but that just really gives a pat answer for a very complicated, complex issue, and also keeps you from loving other people. If we look at people like they're scarred or they're damaged,
you've already judged them. You've said, oh, that person's this or this person's this, and I'm gonna love them from afar. I'm gonna hate the sin and love the sinner.
How many times I was told in my dating years, you want to make sure you date another believer because in the Bible it says don't be unequally yoked. It didn't, like, as long as they claimed they were Christian and seemed like they went to church, it wasn't so much about even the character of the person. It was more about the fact that they had the same belief system, and that in that case there was a chance at it surviving, but not to waste time on people that didn't claim the same belief system as I had, because that would be very difficult and hard and tragic, and all types of different bad outcomes could come of it. And I will tell you right now, my husband didn't profess to be the Christian,
have a label,
that I saw myself as at the time. He has a deep relationship with God, and I've gotten so much wisdom from him throughout the years, but he didn't grow up in church like I did, right? Mm-hmm. So he didn't know the fancy lingo. He didn't know the Bible stories. He didn't know he had a deep relationship with God, but the way he verbalized it and executed in his life is not the same as what it looked like for me. And right. So had I written him off and said, well, you can't sit here and tell me you're a Christian, we would have never had the opportunity to have the kids that we have, the life that we have, the relationship that we have, because I would have just said, just like I did with a lot of friends, mm-hmm. like there were church friends and then there were school friends, and they weren't running in the same circle ever. I was very thankful for my school friends, my sinner friends, which please forgive me because I do not think of you at all like that. But had it not been for the school friends that actually gave me grace and showed me what it's like to have close relationship with people and unconditional love for people, I was shown that actually through my more quote unquote secular friends. So the whole idea of having this entity that says, love everybody, but actually if you see something that's like a warning signal, don't get too close because you might be tempted and fall into sin with this more secular way of thinking, or the secular group of people, and they're going to probably lead you astray and down the wrong path, away from what you're supposed to have as a living relationship with God.
So what do you think when you hear people say, let me be clear, when you hear Christians, those who profess to be Christians, say Oh, well, I love everyone because that's what the Bible tells us to do. So, I don't have to love their lifestyle or their sin, but I do love them.
You have to
What
love all
what do
of the
you
things
think
about
when
them.
when do you think what do you think of when you hear people make comments like that?
You have to love the whole person, and it has to include the good and the bad, because you really don't know a person really if you don't know the bad things about them or the things they struggle with. Not the bad things. I'm not even going to say bad things. The things that they struggle with. If you don't know about those things and you're not available to be open to hearing those things or knowing those things about a person, you don't have the ability to love who they actually are. It's love in word. You can say, like, oh, that seems like a good person. I love that person. But until you really find out who I am, the good and the sin, or whatever you want to call it, the struggle, the constant struggle, then you don't actually meet me where I need to be met. You're not able to show me love. And I would say too,
You've already placed yourself above me. Like
yeah,
you've already made a
yeah,
judgment that somehow I'm below you. So
right.
it would
Would
never
a
be a
marriage
loving
would a
relationship.
marriage ever work in that way? Would a marriage ever work in the way that I'm only this perfect person all the time,
Right.
and if I mess up, you're going to fall out of love with me?
Hmm.
The answer is no, because that's not how we love in a marriage situation. It's not how we love in a friendship. That's not how we love in a family relationship. We accept the good and the bad. And that's why, family, while all of us have many nuances in our family and issues in our own families that are unique to our family, for the most part, I think the idea is that families try to stick together. Families try to be their own tribe. Families try to stand with each other as much as possible. And there are a lot of instances where that's not possible because people have made choices, and we'll leave it at that. But for the most part, family was meant to be some sort of a nucleus and a place where we can come and be safe. And we love each other in this way in a family. And I think that's indicative of how we're supposed to love everybody. It's not just, and then the question, I guess, becomes, how much energy am I willing to put into loving other people? How much time am I willing to put into loving other people? That's where it's really easy to go, love the sinner but not the sin.
Hmm.
You don't have to put in any work to do that. You're literally just saying, yeah, I see you, you have sin in your life, so stay over there, you can be here, but I'm
How
going to
is
be.
that any different though than like just watching like somebody who is in Hollywood and on TV shows? And how you treat them or think about them? It's not any different. There's no relationship there. There's no like you're judging what they do. And we all do it, right? Like it's part of human nature because humans like to try to compartmentalize. And that's
Yeah,
how I think innately we try to organize things because it makes sense to us. And
it makes you
that
feel safe,
it makes you
security.
feel safe to know like, oh, okay, I can trust this person, or oh, I can be friends with this person because we're all part of the same school or the same church congregation or the same um, professional community where we work, right, or whatever. So but the reality is like I don't think it's wrong to just like be real and be like, yeah, that's not really a person I have any interest in getting to know. I
Well,
don't
that's
like,
different.
I think that's different, but it's different because, but you do see a lot of people, this is not just in Christian circles, I think in any circles, you do see a lot of people who, it's almost like this faction of, we see these huge divides with the election coming up. We see huge divides across race relations. We see huge divides caused by COVID-19 about what people deeply believe. And so because of that, it's almost like there's this whole camp of like people who want to not choose sides and they want to say, I mean, why, like, can't we all just get along type thing? And I'm just going to love everybody. I'm going to love everybody. But the thing is, like, you,
What
there's
is
no
love
way you could
actually?
possibly claim to love everybody. You don't know everybody. So why,
Right.
like I'm not going to put time and energy into somebody who has shown me who they are through word, through action. And let's say that they have diminished me and borderline been hateful to me as a person. If I've given you an opportunity to be in my life and to get to know me, and vice versa,
Mm-hmm.
if it's toxic or if that like I'm going to pray for myself to be able to forgive that person because I don't want to hold on to any resentment or hatred or anything. However, it does not become my mission in life to actually then learn how to love that person and somehow bring them back into my life.
Well, I think that we confuse love with trying to make people like the same as us in some way.
That's a
And a
good
lot of times I feel like
I
in the
don't look
church,
at it that way, but yeah, it's a good point.
right. I feel like in the church, especially, like saying to love everybody means actually like bring them to
Indoctrinate
your
them
way
to
of
think the way I think.
bingo, to bring them to my way of thinking, and then I can love them because I experienced this sublime love from God, then they will also be able to experience, which is a beautiful sentiment. However, people don't always respond when you're not willing to meet them where they're at, which is lots of people in places of addiction, people that are in relationships that you don't think are biblically sound, um, people that are doing things in life that you just can't get on board with. How likely are we to bring them to a loving God when we ourselves can't even demonstrate the ability to even sit and listen to what they have to say and what they're going through? It doesn't mean I have to be like, oh yes, what you're doing, everything about what you're doing is great. I think that you're a really amazing person. They could be a shitty person, but you can still find small ways to validate the things about them that are good, because there's good in all of us.
Right.
I believe there's good in every single person walking around, including people that are terrible, like examples of how we act as humans. They do some terrible things, but at some point, I believe there was or still is some sort of underlying thread of goodness there in everybody. And our job as Christians or Christ followers or God followers or whoever followers of the divine, however you see God, is to be able to reach people and show people God by doing just what Jesus did here on earth, which is to go and find the least of these and talk to them. Say, it's going to be okay. What you're doing is not good for you, but you know what? It's okay. You're going to be, if you need to know that these are the really strong things about you. That's loving somebody. And they could still be a shitty person and you don't like being around them, but loving somebody is a little different sometimes than liking them.
Yeah.
The way that we live and interact. And I'm sure there might be people listening to this that think, oh, well, you know what? She's saying all this, but she actually seems like a really judgmental person. And I will say, part of my transition away from the church has been to break down. I mean, as a person in the church, I don't want to offend anybody, but we are terribly judgmental. And I think a lot of times that teaches people that if you go to church, you have to be perfect in order to be there, because if you're not going to be accepted. And you're not going to be accepted. That's
no, and
true.
you hold back how much you share then, whether it's at prayer meetings or small groups, because nobody else shared their stuff. So then you sit there thinking, am I like
everybody's
terrible?
so good?
Am I a terrible person? I'm not going to share what I'm really struggling with. So unfortunately, you become and I was involved with the church deeply for a lot of years. And so I will also say we talk very transparently about this, because if you've had really good experiences in the church, that doesn't discount those. So if you feel triggered, or you feel like offended, or like you need to be defensive right now as you hear this, that's maybe that's more exploration you need to do within yourself, because I used to would have been that way. And
Yeah.
it wasn't, it's because I was in the midst of it, and you become so used to what you're taught to think and believe in a lot of ways, and how you're even taught to act, that you do become very judgmental. And you inadvertently begin thinking you're in higher superiority and better than people, even though I never would have processed it that way, and many of my friends would not have either. That's exactly what happens. And then you're back
Right.
at square one with people just trying to fit in. And so what do people do when they're trying to fit in? They play a game, and they tell you what you want to hear. They're not actually getting healed. They're not actually experiencing the love of God through other people, because we ourselves as people have to be able to put the mirror on our own lives first. So
Right.
I say that all to say, if you've had bad experiences in the church, that doesn't discount those either. So I've had both really good and really bad. It doesn't mean I'm sitting around being mad at the church. It doesn't mean Kara's sitting around being mad at the church. It means we're exploring our faith in a very different way, without the confines of somebody else filtering their interpretation because they happen to take some classes at a Bible college. I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm not trying to diminish the role of pastors or teachers of the Bible, but I also am not trying to elevate it. Much like I always say about teachers and principals. You're a product of how you were trained and how you were taught to do things. And so
Right.
you have to examine how you're continuously evolving yourself in whatever profession you're in. And I hold the same standard for pastors and those who are teaching the Bible. It's no different than what I expect of what teachers should be doing for kids. So
There is a big shift that I would personally like to see change about the church in the next decade, hopefully, is this idea of, instead of having somebody who, just like to your point, just because you went to seminary doesn't mean you've been ordained by God to speak your mouth, right? Just because you thought it was a good idea to go to seminary doesn't mean that God intended you to get in front of congregation and say anything. Okay? Number one, not all ministers or pastors are actually called by God to be ministers and pastors. Number one. Number two, when you have a situation where you have one person standing at the front of the room with, it could be 50 people, it could be 100 people, it could be 10,000 people, that can be incredibly powerful, right? That's okay. That's good. There are times and occasions that powerful word of God speakers should get in front of crowds of people and speak. But doesn't it look more like an elevation of one person when Sunday after Sunday you have one person coming up there? There's no dialogue. There's no Q&A time. There is one person up there saying what he felt led to say, or I don't even know. I don't know the process of creating a sermon, but they're presumably praying on this throughout the week, deciding what is important to share with their congregation.
I don't know. We should ask our uncle.
I don't know.
I'm not trying to be cheeky, but I think it also involves a lot of bike riding and coffee and hanging out.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a creative process there.
I'm joking. I'm not downplaying pastors. I'm sorry, pastor friends. I'm just joking and being cheeky, because that's what a lot of, the cool hipster pastors you see, like that's what they're spending time doing. I'm only laughing because then I immediately think, if that was a woman and I was choosing to spend my time that way, would I be questioned about how much work I'm putting in to prepare and why
Right.
I'm sharing my lifestyle the way that I am?
Right.
That's all that my mind goes to, is the double standards that still very clearly exist, and also that most of us can't walk into a congregation and even see a female listed as a head pastor.
Right.
Or even, I mean, you might be able to be a deacon at this point.
Maybe. So what I'd like to see is, yes, more women in leadership, because we bring a 100% different perspective than, I'm listening for my whole life to a male perspective of a woman's world. What? Like,
yeah, of what a woman should be,
what I should be, what makes me holy, how I am. You've never been a woman before. I don't think. Maybe in the next 10 years we'll have some.
a whole other sermon, right?
That's a whole other sermon for a whole other day. But I would like to see that. I would like to see it be a situation where it's like, when Jesus sat on a rock and he had a few people around him, his disciples, and they're like talking back and forth. Hey, God, or Jesus, whatever, what did it mean in the Torah when it said this? But you're telling me this. Like, I don't understand. And Jesus, like, then has dialogue of what he knows, but he doesn't say, this is how it is. He says parables. He teaches in parables. If you notice in the Bible, Jesus doesn't really say the red letters. He doesn't say, like, this is right and this is wrong. The apostles say that in their teachings and their writings and out of their cultural experience. But Jesus never answers a question of doctrine with anything but a parable, which means we're supposed to interpret that for what it means, right? And there could be multiple ways that people interpret that.
I keep going back to, man, I feel bad because I don't remember his real name, but he's known as the Naked Pastor.
Oh yeah.
I keep going. Sorry, I'm not giving credit where credit's due, but the Naked Pastor. I heard him talking on Instagram, and he was saying that, and this is a guy who's been in multiple church movements, been a pastor, right, for many years. And he was also very involved with the Vineyard Church, which is a specific denomination.
What is it called?
The Vineyard. And I was actually very involved. It's an evangelical, like non-denom. But I was very involved with a Vineyard Church.
Non-denominational church?
I don't quite understand it, right? Like, all these different denominations have different governing bodies, essentially, which kind of tell you what you can and can't do. And so to be a church, you what? Sorry, you broke up. Say that again.
It kind of tells you that there's no accountability. It tells you that there's no accountability.
Well, right. It's people at the top, I'm using air quotes, listeners, who have decided this is what we definitively believe in this denomination. And we are going to set the rules and standards by which you have to run a church. So there's benefits for churches to be attached to, like, Church of God in Christ, Calvary Assemblies of God, the Catholic Church, right? Like, it's beneficial because you are attached to more resources for your congregation. You might get speaking gigs, you as a pastor. You might be connected to conferences that are exclusive to that. Like, it's this whole world, because otherwise you really are just independent. And I honestly, there are not a whole lot of, to my knowledge, just independent churches. Most churches are tied back to a specific denomination, just like, again, I'm not trying to diminish it, and feel free to email or DM us directly if you have pastoral experience years and have seen otherwise. But actually, even as I'm thinking of it right now, it's really not any different than like Mary Kay or Beachbody. Choose your denomination, choose what you want to sell, and we will set the standards for what you need to abide by, while also taking a percentage of that and saying, if you're equipped and qualified, do you have enough members and parishioners and tithers to be able to go on this next mission trip? Just like, do you have enough people on your team in Beachbody to rank up for the next trip? So I'm literally just thinking of this out loud, but it's really not set up any different.
So are you calling church an MLM? Is
I'm
that
not.
what you're
I'm not, and I didn't say that. I'm just saying the parallels are definitely there.
I can see those parallels. That's a very interesting perspective. I'm not disagreeing with you.
And I'm really not trying to be facetious, because like I've said, and I'll continue to say to new listeners, I've had great experiences in the church. I haven't had all really crappy experiences, but I have had great experiences in the church too. It's just unpacking, all this goes back to, for us, is unpacking, why do I believe what I believe? And how you choose to go about finding different resources and sources for that. I was saying all that to say, the Naked Pastor talks about how God is the ocean, and each of those denominations, like I was just saying, they go and take a little bowl, and they grab some water from the ocean, a tiny bowl, imagine the size of my hands, and they say, this is God in that little bowl.
We can't bring the ocean. We can't bring the ocean to you, so we'll bring you this. Because how overwhelming would it be? It would be overwhelming for people to have the entire ocean and have to decipher and decide what makes sense. And I can find value in the structure that the church provides, but there are churches that
just
work
like an MLM back office,
right? So,
sorry.
But there are churches. I know churches. I haven't been able to find any local to me, but I have full faith that someday I will. But there are churches operating in the United States that are certainly run, instead of like a business, they're run with the expectation that they are affirming to everybody, first of all,
right.
And their doors really are open to everybody.
Right.
They don't have a backdoor policy where, homeless woman comes in off the street, like they were talking about in the most recent episode of Dirty Rotten Church Kids.
Yeah.
Is smelly, stinky, in tattered clothes, and she's ushered out the back door after 2 or 3 weeks of being there and told not to come back, essentially, because she doesn't fit whatever image. There are certainly places in our country that are operating not in that way whatsoever. And I agree with you 100%. I have had great experiences in church, but I have had also really, really harmful and toxic situations in church.
Yeah, agree.
And the times that were great, though, if I really have to pinpoint it, were times where I was going and it was about me being nourished. It wasn't about what I could give or what I needed to give of myself. It was me fully embracing the presence of God in that place, because where one or two gather in his name, there he will be also.
Right.
That is real. That is powerful and tangible. But when I could just focus in on that and the presence of God, those are the times that church meant something huge to me in my faith journey.
Yeah.
Now, in the next breath after service, if I have an interaction with somebody that seems toxic and judgmental in any way, shape, or form, that's likely to give me somewhat of the impression that I have today.
Right.
If it happens repeatedly, and in some instances in congregations, it does happen repeatedly.
Yep.
Yes, people can come there as a safe haven and feel the love of God, but if you are not an extension of that, what are you doing? Why are you even meeting?
You're just
You might as well sleep in.
you're just a personification of high school cliques.
Mm.
Because then it becomes more about trying to fit in. You know? Oh, well, we really need people to lead children's church. Come on, you got to get involved. And then guess what? That same person that says that to me, they've already made a judgment because they've observed that I haven't gotten involved, but they never asked me why. They just assume, well, we heard you were a teacher, so you should want to give of yourself. You should want to give of yourself freely. And it goes back to connecting with people authentically. If you didn't ask me anything about myself, how I volunteer, what I'm involved in my own community where I live, I'm sorry. Then why are you already judging me? You've already put me into the box of this chick wants to come to church, but she doesn't want to volunteer. That's how that's received. So if you're listening and you've been a person who's been at church and done that, and forgive me, anybody, because there's a time period where I try to get a lot of my friends to go to church. Now, did I tell them they had to be involved? No. Did I think it was important that they go to church? Yes. Have I changed my perspective on that? Yes. But when that is the way you're greeted and it's not about getting to know you as a person, you've already made it very clear that, well, we just want to see what you can give to us for free.
And you're always going to be on the outside until you make that step.
That's right.
To be on the
right.
inside. It's not usually a real community that's safe and open and welcoming. It's a transactional thing. I counted them the other day because I was thinking about this. We have been to 5 churches in our area since we moved to our rural community. 5. And we attended all of them for at least 3 or more months because we wanted to be sure we gave them a fair shake. Every single church that we tried at about the 2-month mark, oh, well, if you're keeping your kids in nursery, would you like to volunteer? Since you're keeping your kids in the nursery during service, would you like to since you're utilizing our services, would you like to be part of that? And I said, hell no. I have 3 kids in diapers right now, and I need a break. I need to sit in service for an hour and worship God.
Yeah, when are you supposed to hear God? Not hear God, but when are you supposed to hear the word that supposedly an expert is teaching on?
Am I missing something here?
And you know what? If you don't have enough volunteers in your congregation who want to have those services and ministries, then don't start them and don't offer them. And then you hound people all the time.
You pay people to staff because you receive an offering that is part of your ministry to the community that you live in. Mm-hmm. I have no problem volunteering my time, but at that point in our life, when we needed a safe place to be on a Sunday morning and have a breath and hear from God, in a lot of ways we couldn't because our lives were so chaotic. That was incredibly painful for me because I had given years of service to the church. Don't get me wrong.
Yep.
Maybe not in your church, but you don't know because you didn't ask.
Yeah, you don't know anything about this woman. And that's the first interaction. That isn't how Jesus treated the people he encountered. That is not how he treated. Now, I would have to look at the timeline, but he was even very clear, I feel like, with the disciples about what that would require.
Yeah.
He didn't force anybody to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
He said, take up your cross and follow me. And they said, okay.
Right. And that looked different for Paul than it looked for Peter, than it looked for Thomas, etc.
Right.
Thomas.
And he was fine with
Thomas
all of
was
it.
the disciple, right? He was the doubting one. Yeah.
How many? Yeah. So we probably need to wrap up because I know you have another call coming up.
Oh, thank you for helping me with time management, which I'm not always the best at because I get involved in conversation.
That got heated for me, but I want listeners to know that's a real sentiment. That's something that is deeply connected for me to my present disdain. Okay. So when you say, well, we're not talking down to the church or people that go to church, that is absolutely true. But I am challenging people that are in the church right now to hear this and internalize it, get mad about it, and get mad about it not because I'm sitting here saying it, get mad about it because this is a truth and you know it's true. Because all of us have experienced this in one form or another.
Right.
So how are we, church, going to change the dialogue here for the next however many years?
Well, how are we going to change the way that we do church? And are you willing? I will leave us with this final charge to further make your point too. Are you willing to ask, what am I thinking about other people and about myself when I'm sitting in church? I would challenge you to start there. Are you looking around? Are you still on your phone? Are you like, what's your purpose?
Are you looking at what people are wearing on Sunday morning?
You took the words out of my mouth. And I'm saying this because, excuse me, we both have these thought processes, because when you're sitting there, you want it to be about God and you want it to be about the thing you're there for. But when you know how people have treated you, you often then, and even if they haven't, I think just humans in general, sometimes you're just looking around, you're comparing yourself. Like, why are you really involved with the church you're involved with? To what degree is that helping or hindering your life and your relationships with others? And most importantly, your willingness to be vulnerable and honest with yourself and with God. Like, those are the questions, some of them to start with, especially when there's so many different thoughts and beliefs flying around. And I see there's pastors who have preached great messages, even on racial reconciliation. There's churches who are definitely taking steps with different things with COVID or whatever, right? Like, however they can serve in their communities. But there's certainly a lot of churches whose true colors are being revealed. And at the end of the day, it's not pointing the finger at a pastor or a specific church or a denomination. This is about you and your own journey. And that's why we talk like this and ask the questions that we do, because if there was this ending point of like, okay, I've arrived, I'm a member at a church, there's nothing else to do, I know my gifts and talents, yeah, but I go to work because I provide for my spouse and I provide for my kids. Like, just start to ask yourself, why are you thinking the way that you think? And how boring of, like, is that really what, not even boring, but is that really what God even wants of us? To just say, oh, okay, I made it to the finish line. Whatever that finish line is for you. Maybe it was you wanted to get married. Maybe you wanted to buy a house. Maybe you wanted to have kids. Maybe you wanted to have a dream job. Whatever it is. The Bible also talks about idolatry. That's a pretty vibrant picture of idolatry at its finest. To say, if we can just do X, Y, Z and have this type of home and this type of car and da 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 da, then we'll be making it. Oh, and by the way, we will still check the box that we go to church every Sunday or we meet with our small group. But what the heck is the point of meeting with the small group when y'all are all just making shit up? You're not telling, I mean, you're just sitting around praying and it feels nice maybe in the moment, but you're not really sharing your deepest, darkest struggles and saying, wow, I had that same thing happen. This is what helped me. Let's figure this out.
We've been in small groups for extended periods of time, right? So we know this is what goes on. We're not
Yes,
speaking.
I led small groups. I've been in them and I've led them. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I will say too, to wrap us up too, my whole intention in sharing my heart, this is very difficult because we have close friends and family still very, very active in the church. So it feels sometimes like I don't want to hurt these people because I love them. I care about their faith journey. I'm not trying to convert them to my way of thinking by any means, but I know that this hurts, right? To hear this stuff. But I will say I want everybody to experience real freedom in Christ. Like we talk about this all the time, and it's a vague concept in a lot of respects. I wasn't actually able to experience it until I left the church, if that tells you anything.
Yeah.
So I want people to know, and if our lives aren't evidence enough, and the growth and abundance that we're experiencing, and you're seeing an outpouring of sharing and vulnerability from us, if that's not evidence enough for you to see a true and living God, then that's okay. But I want my love for people and my love for humanity is a desire that everybody is free and everybody is able to experience the freedom and relationship and partnership with God.
Yeah.
It's not that's all. That's my motivation. So I know I got heated there for a minute. There are lots of things in our history that are very hard to talk about. We haven't really even scratched the surface, believe it or not. But just know, if you're sitting here listening to this, like, what is she talking about? I go to church. My church isn't like this. Please just think about it as your first time there. If you were super welcomed, I'm happy, but also think about some people around you that maybe haven't been treated well, and you know who I'm talking about. They're in every church.
Start with something that has baffled you about the Bible, right? Start with something of like, yeah, I've never really understood why this is so important. Start with that, like with yourself. I'm saying, like, if you journal or whatever, but start with something like that, because that will get you interested in really trying to study the Bible, not just like a prescribed devotional or one verse that you happen to read or whatever, but start to unpack, because we all have those things that we're like, yeah, the pastor never really explained why this was really right or wrong. And I'm not really even sure what the Bible says. Like, start with one of those questions that you've been too scared to ask at church or in your small group. But start that for yourself. We're not saying you have to go on Facebook and share your journey or all that kind of stuff. For us, this is good for us because it has put us out of our comfort zone to share in this way, and be vulnerable. So that would be my encouragement. Start with like whatever that one thing is that you're like, that you always say, oh, when I get to heaven, I want to ask God about this. Like, just start asking now. Start asking now and start studying.
You're allowed. You are more than allowed. You're supposed to. You're supposed to.
It's your faith. It's your faith ownership, your faith journey. So don't sit back and act like you don't have an active role to play in your faith, and that you have to wait for somebody, another human. We're all imperfect. We all have issues. Like, we all don't wait for somebody to
we all have totally different beliefs that are taught from the pulpit. Like, right. I can go to 5 different churches on a Sunday morning. Every single one's going to tell me something different about this verse. Like, that is the reality. So that's
you have to know where your conviction lies, and you have to be deeply enough connected to God to understand why you believe what you believe.
And the reason that you should do this is so you can actually do the greatest of all of these, which is to love other people. That's why It's important for you to have an authentic faith, because if you're just regurgitating, you haven't internalized anything, and you can't love in the way that God intended you to love other people. It's impossible. You will always sit in a seat of judgment. When you're sitting there judging yourself constantly because of the things that have been told down to you, you can't see what love actually looks like in the way that God
because you have so much stored up self-hatred, and you're so fearful all the time that, oh, what if they really like, would you still want me to do announcements if you knew I was out until 4 a.m. dancing and I got 2 hours of sleep and I'm still a little hungover? Would you really?
You might smell a little like beer.
I mean, is that a true story about me? But that's the thing. That's what happens in religion. And when you don't play an active role, you end up just showing up so you can still check that box, because it's been conditioned in you that, quote unquote, that is what a good Christian or a good believer does. So no, it doesn't necessarily take away from the fact that, like, in my brokenness at different times in my life, I was still trying to do what was, quote unquote, right. But it was never done. It was done because that's what I had been told, not necessarily because I felt like I really needed to be at church every Sunday.
That's not what it was intended for you.
No.
At the time. Right.
All right. Well, what do they say? It's a semicolon, not a period, because we will be continuing the conversation always. But be sure, listeners, thank you so much for your support. We've had a lot more subscribers in the past couple months, so just continue to share if you find value. We would love to hear what else you want to hear about and what topics. More details to come on the web series, but we're super excited about it, and it will be coming out soon. So bye, sister.
Bye, sister.